The crisp, metallic click of the solid gold lighter was the only sound in the cavernous penthouse office. Jackson Hayes, a man who measured his worth in stock tickers and skyline views, didn't even look up from his desk. He simply gestured towards the door, with the lighter, the small flame dancing like a malevolent spirit. "The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Charlotte. You get nothing. My lawyers will be in touch about the termination." Outside, the rain began to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the storm breaking inside her. He was talking about their baby, their unborn child, and he was dismissing them both as if they were a failed business venture. She stood there, one hand protectively on her stomach, her world reduced to the cold, indifferent flick of a rich man's thumb. This is the story of how that one callous gesture would unravel an empire and prove that the most powerful currency in the world isn't money. It's a father's love. Life with Jackson Hayes was a meticulously curated performance. Charlotte Vance had once been captivated by it, by him. They met at a gallery opening where one of her architectural sketches was being displayed, a small local event he'd attended on a whim. He'd been charming electric, with a smile that seemed to mint its own currency. He wasn't old money. He was something more potent in the modern world, new money, self-made, and ferociously ambitious. His tech company Nexus Dynamics had disrupted the financial world, and he moved through life with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. Their courtship was a whirlwind of breathtaking excess. Dinners in Paris just for the evening, helicopter rides over the Grand Canyon at sunrise, a private concert with her favorite indie band on their anniversary. He'd showered her with gifts, a vintage Cartier watch, a custom-designed sports car, a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He called her his muse, his anchor in the chaotic world of high-stakes business. Charlotte, an orphan, raised by a quiet, doting father who ran a modest but respected antique bookshop in Vermont, was initially overwhelmed. Her father, Arthur Vance, had been skeptical. "A man who buys that much, Charlotte," he'd said gently over the phone, his voice warm and wise, "is often trying to own something, not love it. Be careful, his price for you isn't your own soul." She had dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned protectiveness. She was in love, or she had convinced herself she was. The penthouse on Park Avenue, with its panoramic views of Central Park, felt like a palace. But over the first 2 years of their marriage, she began to notice the gilding on her cage. Jackson didn't love her passion for architecture. He loved telling people his wife was an architect. He'd funded a small studio for her in the city, but it was more of a showroom for his friends, a testament to his modern sensibilities. When she would get lost in her designs, sketching sustainable community housing projects, he would tap his watch impatiently. "Ellie, darling, the Bainbridges are expecting us. We can't be late. Your hobby can wait." Her friends, the ones from her life before Jackson, slowly faded away. They were too normal, too unambitious for Jackson's circle of venture capitalists and socialites. Her new friends were women with surgically perfected faces and eyes that held the cold, transactional gleam of a stock exchange floor. They didn't discuss books or art. They discussed asset allocation and the best tax havens. The loneliness was a quiet, creeping thing. It found her in the echoing silence of the 10,000-square-foot penthouse when Jackson was on yet another business trip to Singapore or Dubai. She would stand by the vast windows, looking down at the city lights, feeling utterly disconnected from the vibrant life teeming below. Then the miracle happened. A small, fluttering hope that started as a whisper in her soul. After months of trying, she was pregnant. She imagined Jackson's reaction, picturing a crack in his perfect polished veneer. She imagined him dropping to his knees, pressing his ear to her stomach, his voice thick with an emotion that wasn't tied to a stock price or a successful merger. She planned the reveal perfectly. A quiet evening at home, a tiny pair of designer baby shoes in a gift box on his pillow. He came home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and someone else's perfume. He was agitated, pacing the marble floor, barking into his phone about a hostile takeover bid from a rival firm led by the notoriously ruthless Sienna Davenport. "Jackson," she began softly, her heart thumping against her ribs. "Not now, Charlotte," he snapped, not looking at her. "I'm on the verge of the biggest deal of my life. This Davenport woman is a shark. I need total focus." "But this is important," she insisted, holding out the small box. He sighed, an exaggerated theatrical sound of pure annoyance. He snatched the box from her hand and ripped it open. He stared at the tiny white sneakers for a long, silent moment. Charlotte held her breath, waiting for the joy, the surprise, the love. Instead, a chilling coldness crept into his eyes. It was a look she had seen him give a subordinate who had failed him once just before he'd fired him on the spot. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, his voice dangerously low. He tossed the box onto the bed as if it were contaminated. "A baby. Now, do you have any idea what this means?" "It means we're going to be a family," she whispered, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "It means a distraction," he corrected, his voice rising. "It means crying and sleepless nights and a complete derailment of our lives. I'm about to close a 9-figure deal, Charlotte. Our image is one of power, of sleek, unencumbered success. A screaming infant doesn't fit the brand." The cruelty of his words struck her like a physical blow. "The brand Jackson. This is our child." "It's a liability," he spat. "A biological complication. You need to fix this. There are clinics, discreet ones. I'll have my assistant arrange everything." Charlotte stared at him, the man she thought she knew dissolving before her eyes, replaced by a monster clad in a bespoke suit. The love she thought they shared was just another one of his assets, and it was about to be liquidated. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The warmth vanished from their home, replaced by a frigid, oppressive silence. Jackson treated her like a ghost, his eyes sliding past her, as if she were a piece of furniture he no longer liked. The casual touches, the morning kisses, the shared laughter over breakfast, all gone. He moved into one of the guest suites at the far end of the penthouse, the distance a physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened between them. He began to apply pressure, not with overt threats, but with a series of cold, calculated maneuvers. He'd leave brochures for exclusive restorative clinics in Switzerland on her nightstand. He'd talk loudly on the phone with his lawyers in her presence, using phrases like unforeseen domestic complications and protecting primary assets. His business life, however, was thriving on the adrenaline of his battle with Sienna Davenport and her company, Apex Innovations. Sienna was his equal in ambition and his superior in ruthlessness. She was everything Jackson admired, sharp, beautiful in a severe way, and utterly devoid of sentiment. Charlotte saw pictures of them in financial magazines captioned "Titans at War," but their body language at industry events seemed more like that of co-conspirators. One evening, Jackson hosted a dinner party. It was a strategic event meant to court investors and project an image of unshakable confidence. Charlotte, now 6 weeks pregnant, and battling morning sickness, was expected to play her part. She put on a brave face and a stunning emerald gown, the fabric hiding the very slight swell of her stomach. Throughout the dinner, Jackson was performatively attentive, placing a hand on the small of her back, laughing at her comments. But his eyes were cold, and his touch felt like ice. The guest of honor was Sienna Davenport herself. It was a bold power move on Jackson's part, inviting his chief rival into his home. Sienna was magnetic. She commanded the room with her sharp intellect and even sharper wit. She engaged Charlotte in conversation, her gaze analytical, missing nothing. "Jackson tells me you're an architect," Sienna said, swirling a glass of red wine. "That must be quaint, designing little houses while he designs the future of global finance." "I focus on sustainable community projects," Charlotte replied, her voice steady. "I believe a home should be more than an asset." Sienna smiled, a thin, predatory curve of her lips. "A noble sentiment. But sentiment doesn't fund progress or win wars." She looked from Charlotte's flat stomach pointedly up to her eyes, a silent, knowing challenge. In that moment, Charlotte knew that Sienna was not just a business rival. She was the future Jackson wanted, a future without the complication Charlotte was carrying. After the guests had left, the facade shattered. "You were staring at her all night," Charlotte said, the accusation hanging in the air. "I was studying my competition," Jackson retorted, loosening his tie. "Something you wouldn't understand. Sienna gets it. She understands that sacrifice is necessary for greatness." "And our baby is the sacrifice?" Charlotte's voice trembled. Jackson's face hardened into a mask of cruel resolve. "I spoke to my team. The optics are a disaster. A pregnancy right now suggests a shift in focus domesticity. It suggests weakness. Davenport will use it against me. The board will get nervous. This isn't about the board, Jackson. This is about us. There is no us if my company falters," he roared, his voice bouncing off the marble and glass. "Everything you have, this apartment, your clothes, your fake studio. It's all because of me. Because of my relentless, undivided focus. You are threatening that." He walked over to the bar and poured himself a stiff scotch. He took a long swallow before turning back to her, his eyes devoid of any emotion she recognized. "So I'm giving you a choice, Charlotte," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "It's the life we have, the future I am building, or that thing you are carrying. You make an appointment, and we go back to how things were. Or you can walk out that door with nothing but the clothes on your back. The prenup is absolute. I've made sure of it." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't a choice. It was an execution order. He was asking her to choose between a life of empty luxury and the life of her own child. She looked at this man, this stranger, and the last vestiges of love and hope withered and died. In their place, a cold, hard certainty began to grow. She finally understood her father's warning. Jackson hadn't just bought her things. He had tried to buy her very being, and the price was indeed her soul. Her hand went to her stomach, a primitive, protective gesture. She felt a surge of strength she didn't know she possessed. It was the fierce, unyielding power of a mother. "There's nothing to choose," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tense silence. "I'm keeping my baby." Jackson's face twisted into a sneer of disbelief, then contempt. "Fine," he hissed. "You've made your decision. Don't expect a single penny from me. You're a fool, Charlotte. You're throwing away a kingdom for a crying, pathetic infant." He turned his back on her, dismissing her, already moving on. For him, The transaction was complete. The asset had been written off. Jackson didn't wait. His cruelty was as efficient as his business dealings. The very next morning, while Charlotte was numbly packing a small suitcase with a few personal items, photos of her and her father, her favorite books, her portfolio of architectural sketches, two stern-faced men in dark suits appeared at the bedroom door, Jackson's personal security. "Ma'am," the taller one said, his voice polite but firm. "Mr. Hayes has instructed us to escort you from the premises." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from her chest to her cheeks. She was being evicted from her own home like a common trespasser. She looked past them down the long, opulent hallway and saw Jackson standing by the elevator phone to his ear, already deep in a business call. He didn't even grant her a final glance. She was walked out of the building. The doorman who had greeted her with a warm smile every day for 2 years, now staring fixedly at a point above her head, his face a mask of professional indifference. Jackson had already cut her out of the narrative of his life, editing her existence with a few swift, brutal commands. Standing on the rain-slicked pavement of Park Avenue, with a single suitcase and the designer clothes on her back, the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She reached into her purse for her phone to call a cab, then pulled out her wallet, her credit cards. The platinum cards Jackson had so proudly given her were gone. She remembered leaving her purse on the kitchen counter that morning. He must have had his staff remove them. She tried her debit card at a nearby ATM. "Card blocked. Please contact your bank." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. He had locked her out of their joint account. She was pregnant, alone, and utterly penniless in the most expensive city in the world. She swallowed her pride, the bitter taste of it filling her mouth, and called the one person she knew she could count on, her oldest friend, Maria. Maria was a nurse who lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens, a world away from the gilded prison Charlotte had just fled. Hearing Maria's warm, concerned voice on the other end of the line was the first kindness Charlotte had felt in months, and it broke her. The story tumbled out between choked sobs, a torrent of pain, betrayal, and fear. "You get in a taxi right now," Maria said, her voice fierce with protective anger. "I don't care what it costs, I'll pay for it when you get here. Just come home. Charlotte, come to me." The following weeks were a blur of survival. Maria's small apartment was a haven of warmth and normalcy. The smell of coffee brewing in the morning, the sound of sitcoms on the television, the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. It was all a stark contrast to the sterile, silent luxury of the penthouse. Charlotte learned the humbling reality of having nothing. She sold the Cartier watch and the few pieces of jewelry she'd had in her suitcase. The money was a lifeline, but it wouldn't last forever. She started looking for work, but being in the early, exhausting stages of pregnancy made it difficult. No architectural firm wanted to hire a new junior designer who would need maternity leave in 6 months. The shame was a constant companion. She had been so proud, so sure of the life she was building. Now she felt like a failure. She spent her days walking through the parks in Queens, her portfolio in her bag, feeling more invisible than she ever had in Jackson's shadow. The world saw a woman who had failed to hold on to her millionaire husband. They didn't see the woman who had chosen her child over a fortune. One evening, staring at her dwindling bank balance, the stark reality of bringing a child into this instability hit her with full force. She couldn't rely on Maria's generosity forever. She needed help, real help. There was only one person left to call. The person she had been avoiding, not out of fear, but out of a deep, painful shame for not heeding his advice. Her father. She had told him a diluted version of the truth, that she and Jackson were separating, that she needed some time. She had downplayed the cruelty, the abandonment, the utter destitution. She hadn't wanted to worry him. Arthur Vance was in his late 60s, and she pictured him in his cozy bookshop in Vermont, surrounded by the quiet dignity of old leather and paper, and she couldn't bear the thought of shattering his peace with the ugly truth of her life. But now she had no choice. For her baby, she had to swallow her pride. With trembling fingers, she dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and comforting as she remembered. "Charlotte Pumpkin, is everything all right? You sound tired." And just like that, her carefully constructed dam of composure broke. The whole story poured out of her, the pregnancy, the ultimatum, the public eviction, the frozen bank accounts, the terrifying uncertainty of her future. She cried deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a daughter who had finally come home, if only by phone. She expected him to be angry, to shout, to say, "I told you so." Instead, he listened patiently, the silence on his end of the line, profound and heavy. When she finally finished her voice, a raw whisper, there was a long pause. "Is that his full name?" Arthur asked, his voice different now. It was unnervingly calm, stripped of all warmth, and replaced by something that sounded like polished steel. "Jackson Hayes, CEO of Nexus Dynamics." "Yes, Daddy," she whispered, "and he is based in New York." "The company is publicly traded on the NASDAQ." "Yes. Why?" Another pause, this one shorter, more decisive. "Don't you worry about a thing, my dear," Arthur Vance said, and the quiet authority in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Not the money, not your apartment, not that boy. I want you to rest. I want you to eat well and take care of my grandchild. I will handle Jackson Hayes." "Daddy, what are you going to do?" she asked, a flicker of fear mixing with her relief. "Please don't do anything crazy." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that was completely alien to her. "Crazy? Oh no, Charlotte. I'm going to be perfectly, devastatingly rational. He has made the grave mistake of valuing assets above my daughter. I'm simply going to teach him a lesson in valuation." He hung up, leaving Charlotte staring at her phone, a sense of awe and trepidation washing over her. She had just unleashed something. She had called her quiet, gentle, book-loving father. But the man who had answered at the end of that call was someone else entirely. For Jackson Hayes, the day his world began to fracture started like any other, with a 5 a.m. workout with his personal trainer, a custom-blended kale smoothie, and a market analysis report that put Nexus Dynamics on a trajectory for another record-breaking quarter. He had successfully excised Charlotte from his life with surgical precision. The momentary inconvenience was over. Now he could focus entirely on the acquisition of a smaller, innovative AI firm, a move that would cement his dominance over Sienna Davenport. He felt powerful, unburdened. He strode into the Nexus Dynamics Tower, a gleaming monument of steel and glass in the heart of Manhattan, feeling the familiar rush of being a master of his universe. The first sign of trouble was insignificant, almost laughable. He was at a power lunch with 2 hedge fund managers trying to woo them into backing his next venture. When the bill came a staggering sum he wouldn't even blink at, he handed the waiter his exclusive black-tiered Centurion card. The waiter returned a few minutes later, his expression apologetic. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Hayes. The card has been declined." Jackson frowned. "That's impossible. Run it again." The waiter nodded and left only to return with the same result. Declined, sir. The message says, card suspended. Contact issuer. A flicker of annoyance. He pulled out a second card, a corporate platinum. That too was declined. Red-faced, he had to ask one of the fund managers to cover the bill, a deep humiliation that soured the entire meeting. He chalked it up to a glitch, a technical error in the bank's fraud detection system. Back in his office, he called his private banker at Sterling Wentworth, a man whose entire job was to cater to his every financial whim. "Robert, what the hell is going on with my cards?" Jackson barked into the phone. Robert sounded flustered, confused. I don't know, Mr. Hayes. I'm looking at your accounts right now, and this is very strange. There's a freeze, a complete administrative lockdown on all your personal assets held by this institution." "A freeze on whose authority?" Jackson demanded, his voice rising. "That's just it, sir. I've never seen anything like it. It's not from a government agency like the IRS or the SEC. It appears to be an internal directive from our highest-level global risk management division, citing unforeseen third-party liabilities. It's completely locked. I can't touch it." A cold knot of dread began to form in Jackson's stomach. This was more than a glitch. He ended the call and tried to log into his personal trading account with a different brokerage. Access denied. He tried to wire money from his corporate account to a personal one. Transaction failed. It was as if a digital wall had been erected around his entire fortune, and he was on the outside looking in. Panic began its insidious creep. His wealth was his identity, his power, his very lifeblood. Without it, he was nothing. He spent the afternoon in a frantic series of calls to his lawyers, his accountants, his board members. No one had an answer. They were all hitting the same impenetrable wall. Whispers started circulating. His CFO called his voice tense. Their main line of corporate credit had been suspended pending a review. The AI acquisition was now in jeopardy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his opulent office, his private unlisted phone line rang. The caller ID was blocked. He snatched it up. "Who is this?" he snarrows. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and carried an weight of immense, unshakable authority. It was the voice of a man who had never had to raise it in his life. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Arthur Vance." Jackson's mind raced. Vance? Charlotte's father. The old man with the dusty bookshop in Vermont. What could he possibly want? Was he calling to plead for his daughter? "Look, if this is about Charlotte, you're wasting your time." Jackson sneered, feeling a surge of arrogant confidence. "She made her choice. The little money you think you can get from me is, let me stop you there, son." Arthur's voice cut through him, the word son, dripping with icy condescension. "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about who I am. You see, the bookshop is a hobby, a pleasant diversion. It keeps me grounded." A confused silence hung in the air. "My actual work," Arthur continued, his voice as smooth and cold as Riverstone, "is as the chairman and majority shareholder of Vance Global Holdings." Jackson felt the blood drain from his face. Vance Global. Not a company, but a colossus. A private multinational conglomerate with controlling interests in logistics, banking, and technology across 4 continents. They were a silent giant, rarely in the news because they owned the news outlets. Their influence was the stuff of legend in the highest circles of finance, a force that could move markets with a single, quiet phone call. Sterling Wentworth Jackson's primary bank was one of their smaller subsidiaries. Vance Global Arthur said, as if sensing Jackson's shock has a very strict ethical charter. We do not abide partners who demonstrate a profound character deficit. Your treatment of my daughter Charlotte, who I should mention is the sole heir to my entire portfolio, constitutes such a deficit. Jackson was speechless, his throat suddenly tight and dry. The room felt like it was tilting. The assets you believe are yours, Mr. Hayes, Arthur explained patiently, as if to a child, are all leveraged through institutions that fall under the Vance Global umbrella. Your credit lines, your investment platforms, the very bank that holds your company's capital. They are all in a manner of speaking mine. And as of this morning, I have instructed them to place a temporary but total hold on any account associated with you or Nexus Dynamics. You can't do that. Jackson stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. That's illegal. Arthur Vance laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of a lion observing a mouse. Illegal, Mr. Hayes, when you control the board of the bank that lends you the money. It's called risk mitigation. You, my boy, have suddenly become the highest possible risk. You mistook my daughter for a liability. You are about to learn the meaning of the word. The line went dead. Jackson Hayes stood in the center of his office, the useless phone in his hand, surrounded by the trappings of a fortune he no longer controlled. He was a king in a kingdom that had just been seized by a power he never even knew existed. The bookkeeper from Vermont had just frozen his entire world with a single phone call. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Jackson Hayes, the financial wunderkind, the untouchable titan of tech, became a man trapped in a prison of his own wealth. He was a multi-millionaire on paper, but he couldn't afford to buy a cup of coffee. The first 24 hours were a blur of rage and denial. He stormed into the Sterling Wentworth headquarters the next morning, demanding to see the bank president, a man he had golfed with just last month. He was stopped by security in the lobby. A junior vice president was sent down to meet him, a nervous young man who couldn't meet his eye. Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry, but your accounts are under an executive review, the man mumbled, sweating under Jackson's glare. There's nothing we can do at this branch level. Executive review, I am an executive client, Jackson roared, causing heads to turn in the marble-floored lobby. My company has over $100 million in assets with you. Yes, sir, the man said, flinching. And for now, that's where they'll stay. Humiliated, he retreated. He called an emergency board meeting at Nexus Dynamics. He tried to project calm, to spin the situation as a temporary liquidity issue, a hostile, short-seller attack. But the board members were sharks. They could smell blood in the water. News of their primary credit line being frozen had already spread. The stock price for Nexus Dynamics had begun to wobble. The AI acquisition, the deal that was meant to be his crowning achievement, was the first major casualty. The smaller firm's CEO called him personally. Jackson, he said, his voice flat. We're invoking the financing contingency clause. Your funding is no longer secure. We're pulling out of the deal. We've had another offer. Another offer from who? Jackson demanded. Apex Innovations. Sienna Davenport. Her funding is ironclad. The betrayal was a sharp physical pain. Sienna. Of course. She hadn't hesitated to move in for the kill. He tried calling her a desperate, humbling act. She took the call, her voice oozing mock sympathy. Jackson, darling, I heard you're having some cash flow problems, she purred. Such a shame. If you'd gotten rid of your little domestic distraction sooner, perhaps you would have been more focused. She hung up. His world began to shrink with terrifying speed. His corporate expense account was shut down. The lease on his company's fleet of luxury cars was suspended. He had to take a yellow cab home from the office, a mortifying experience he hadn't had in a decade. When he arrived at his penthouse, the concierge stopped him. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry. There's an issue with the building fees. The automatic payment was declined." He was locked out of his own home, forced to spend the night in a mid-range hotel paying with the last few $100s of cash he had in his wallet. The stark, impersonal room with its scratchy blankets and faint smell of disinfectant was a brutal mockery of his former life. Desperation began to gnaw at him. His friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and eagerly accepted his invitations to yacht parties, were suddenly unavailable. Calls went to voicemail. Texts were left unread. In the world he inhabited, financial trouble was a contagious disease, and no one wanted to be near the infected. Stripped of his money, he was also stripped of his power, his charm, his very identity. He looked at his reflection in the cheap hotel mirror. The bespoke suit was wrinkled. His face was pale, his eyes withal with a fear he had never known. He was no longer Jackson Hayes, the master of the universe. He was just a man who had made a terrible, terrible mistake. His thoughts turned to Charlotte, not with remorse, not with love, but with a raw, animalistic need for survival. She was the key. Her father had done this to him. She could make him stop. He had to find her. He had to convince her, manipulate her, beg her if he had to. He would promise her anything, marriage, the baby, a world of luxury, anything to get his life back. He hired a cheap private investigator with his last bit of cash. Finding her was surprisingly easy. The investigator traced her to a small, unassuming apartment building in Queens, registered under the name Maria Sanchez. Jackson drove there in a rental car, a nondescript sedan that felt alien to him. The neighborhood was a vibrant tapestry of cultures, smells, and sounds he had only ever witnessed from the tinted windows of a chauffeured town car. It felt like a foreign country. He stood on the pavement outside her building, a 3-story brick walk-up. It was so normal, so beneath him. He buzzed the apartment, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and contempt. He would fix this. He would turn on the charm, the charisma that had won her over in the first place. He would get his kingdom back. The door buzzed open. The climb up the 3 flights of stairs felt like an ascent into another world. The hallway smelled of garlic and cleaning products, a stark contrast to the custom-scented, climate-controlled corridors of his penthouse. He found apartment 3B and knocked, smoothing his now rumpled suit jacket, trying to compose his features into a mask of sincere regret. The door opened, and there she was. Charlotte looked different. She wasn't wearing designer silks or glittering diamonds. She was in a simple cotton maternity dress. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her feet were bare. But it was her face that struck him. The anxiety and sadness that had clouded her features for months were gone. In their place was a calm serenity, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. She looked healthier, more vibrant than he had seen her in years. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a gentle, undeniable curve to her belly. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him, but there was no fear, no flicker of the old adoration. There was only a cool, appraising stillness. "Jackson," she said, her voice even. "What are you doing here?" "Charlotte, thank God I found you." He began, forcing a pained expression onto his face. He tried to step inside, but she didn't move, blocking the doorway. We need to talk. I've made a terrible mistake. A catastrophic mistake. You made a choice, she corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. Now why are you here? His practiced charm faltered in the face of her composure. He decided to switch tactics to desperation. Your father, Charlotte. He's destroying me. He's frozen everything. My accounts, my company. Everything is gone. I'm ruined. My father is protecting his family, she said simply, something you failed to understand. This isn't protection, it's a nuclear attack, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, you have to call him. Tell him to stop. I'll do anything. I mean it. We can be a family. You me the baby. I want that. I see it now. I was just stressed. The deal with Sienna, the pressure. It wasn't me. He reached out to touch her arm, but she recoiled as if from a snake. Don't, she said, her voice dropping a new edge of steel in it. Don't you dare touch me. The rejection stunned him. This was not the pliable, gentle Charlotte he knew. You don't want our baby Jackson. She continued, her gaze unwavering. You want a solution to your problem. You see me as a key, a tool to get your money back. Just like you saw our child as a liability. You haven't changed. You're just desperate. He stared at her, seeing the truth in her words reflected in her clear, honest eyes. She saw right through him, through the lies and the performance, to the hollow, grasping core of the man he was. I loved you, he whispered, a last-ditch attempt at emotional blackmail. Charlotte laughed, a short, bitter sound. No, you didn't. You loved the idea of me. The quiet, artistic wife who looked good on your arm at galas. The woman who wouldn't challenge you. The moment I became a real person with a real non-negotiable need, the need to protect my child, I became inconvenient. And you discard inconvenient things, Jackson. From inside the apartment, Maria appeared behind Charlotte. Her arms crossed, her expression one of pure fury. You heard her, Maria said. Get lost. Jackson looked from Charlotte's resolute face to Maria's protective stance. The game was over. There was no angle left to play. He had no leverage, no power, nothing. He saw his reflection in the window of the apartment door, a desperate, broken man in a cheapening suit. And in that moment, he finally understood. Arthur Vance hadn't just taken his money. He had taken his reflection, his identity, and shown him the ugly, empty reality that lay beneath. You'll regret this, he snarled, the desperation curdling into venom. Both of you. Charlotte simply looked at him with something akin to pity. No, Jackson, she said softly. You're the one who will be living with regret. I'm living with my child. I chose life. You chose money. And it seems you've lost. She closed the door in his face. The soft click of the lock echoed in the hallway, a final, definitive sound. It was the end, not just of their marriage, but of the entire world he had built. He was left alone in the hallway, with nothing but the smell of garlic and the crushing weight of his own choices. Jackson Hayes's fall was as swift and brutal as his rise had been meteoric. Without access to capital nexus dynamics, collapsed like a house of cards. The board, seeing the writing on the wall, forced him out. In a final act of humiliation, the company's remaining assets were acquired for pennies on the dollar by Apex Innovations. A press release announced Sienna Davenport as the new CEO of the merged entity, praising her for her strategic vision and financial stability. Jackson's name was not mentioned. He was forced into personal bankruptcy. The penthouse, The cars, the watches, the art collection, all were seized and liquidated to pay off a fraction of his debts. The fair weather friends, the business associates, the entire ecosystem that had orbited his wealth vanished as if they had never existed. He was a pariah. The financial news outlets that had once celebrated his genius now wrote scathing articles about his hubris and mysterious sudden collapse. He ended up in a small rented room in a run-down part of the city, the kind of place he wouldn't have driven through before. He took a job in sales for a small, struggling software company, cold calling potential clients. He wore off-the-rack suits and ate his lunch from a paper bag. Every day was a grinding reminder of what he had lost. He would sometimes see Charlotte's name in the society pages, not as a socialite, but in features on emerging architectural talent. Each mention was a fresh twist of the knife. He was haunted not by the loss of his fortune, but by the memory of her quiet strength as she closed the door on him, and the dawning realization that he had thrown away the only thing of genuine value he had ever possessed. For Charlotte, the months after Jackson's visit were a time of quiet blossoming. With her father's backing, she was free from financial worry. But she refused to step back into a life of idle luxury. Arthur, true to his word, had handled everything. He never gloated or said, "I told you so." He simply provided the security she needed to build a life on her own terms. She moved out of Maria's apartment and into a beautiful light-filled brownstone in Brooklyn, one with a garden in the back. She poured her energy into her work, opening a small, independent architectural firm, Vance Design Studios. She focused on what she was passionate about: creating beautiful, affordable, and sustainable homes for families. Her designs were innovative and empathetic, and she quickly gained a reputation for her integrity and vision. 5 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Arthur. Holding her son for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, Charlotte felt a profound sense of peace. All the pain and betrayal she had endured had led her to this perfect, sacred moment. The love she felt for this tiny human was more real, more powerful than any fleeting thrill Jackson's world had ever offered. Her father was a doting grandfather. The reclusive titan of Vance Global was completely undone by his grandson, spending hours simply holding him, his face softened with a love that was pure and unconditional. He would visit her studio not as a powerful chairman, but as a proud father looking at her blueprints with genuine admiration. "You're building a real legacy, Charlotte," he told her one afternoon as baby Arthur slept in his carrier nearby. "Not one of glass and steel that can crumble overnight, but one of brick and heart and family. That's the kind that lasts." Charlotte looked around her studio at the plans for a new community center on her desk, at her beautiful son sleeping peacefully, and she knew he was right. She had been trapped in a gilded cage, believing it was a palace. It took losing everything to realize she had the power to build her own kingdom, one founded not on a cold balance sheet, but on the unshakable foundations of love, resilience, and self-worth. Jackson Hayes had abandoned her, but in doing so, he had set her free. 5 years had passed. 5 years of peace growth and the quiet, joyful rhythms of a life rebuilt. The ghost of Jackson Hayes had long since faded from Charlotte's daily thoughts, relegated to a sad, cautionary chapter in a book she no longer read. Her world was now colored in the vibrant hues of her son's laughter and the satisfying blues of architectural drafts. Arthur Vance Jr., or Ari, as everyone called him, was a whirlwind of joyous energy. At 5 years old, He had his mother's kind eyes and his grandfather's thoughtful curiosity. He was the sun around which Charlotte's universe lovingly orbited. Her firm Vance Design Studios had become a celebrated name in the industry, lauded for its commitment to creating spaces that nurtured communities. She was no longer Jackson Hayes's discarded wife. She was Charlotte Vance, a creator, a mother, a woman whole and happy on her own terms. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Central Park. The leaves were a riot of gold and crimson, and the air was filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts. Charlotte was pushing Ari on a swing, his delighted squeals soaring into the bright blue sky. It was a moment of perfect, uncomplicated happiness. That's when she felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the primitive instinct of being watched. She slowed the swing, her eyes scanning the periphery of the playground. Her gaze landed on a figure standing near an old oak tree, partially obscured by its trunk. A man thin and hunched, wearing a threadbare jacket that was no match for the autumn chill. Even from a distance, even with the years and the hardship etched into his frame, she knew him. It was Jackson. The sight of him sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Her first immediate instinct was a fierce primal wave of protection. She swiftly lifted Ari from the swing, holding him close, her body a physical shield between her son and the ghost from the past. Ari, sensing the sudden tension in his mother, looked up at her with a concerned frown. Jackson took a hesitant step forward, then another. He looked like a stray dog, starved and uncertain, expecting to be kicked. The arrogant swagger that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a shuffling, defeated gait. His face was gaunt. His once perfect hair was thinning and unkempt, and his eyes, those once predatory eyes that held the cold gleam of the stock market, were now hollowed out, filled with a profound, soul-deep weariness. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Charlotte," he said. His voice was a hoarse rasp, as if it hadn't been used for years. "What do you want, Jackson?" she asked, her tone flat and cold. She held Ari's hand tightly, ready to scoop him up and run. "I don't want anything," he said, quickly raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Not money, not anything from you. I know I don't have the right." He looked past her, his gaze falling on Ari, who was peeking out from behind his mother's legs. A look of such raw, agonizing pain crossed Jackson's face that Charlotte almost flinched. It was the look of a man seeing the vibrant, breathing embodiment of his life's greatest mistake. I had to see him," Jackson whispered, his eyes welling up. "Just once. I work as a custodian in a building a few blocks from here. I saw you walking this way. I just wanted to see his face." Charlotte's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The anger was still there, a hot ember that would never fully extinguish. This man had tried to erase her son from existence. He had called him a complication and a liability. But seeing him now so thoroughly broken, stripped of all artifice and power, the anger was tempered by a sliver of something else. Not pity, but a stark recognition of his profound and utter ruin. "He's beautiful." Jackson choked out a single tear, tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "He looks happy." "He is happy," Charlotte said, her voice firm. "He has a grandfather who adores him. He has friends. He is loved and he is safe. No thanks to you." The words hit him like a physical blow. He nodded, accepting the truth of them without argument. "I know. I deserve this. All of it. I was a monster." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small, clumsily wrapped object. It looked like a cheap toy car from a corner store. I bought this for him, for his birthday. I know it's not for a few months. Can you just give it to him? You don't have to say who it's from. This was the moment of decision. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him to take his pathetic gift and disappear forever. How dare he try to insert himself, even in this small, pitiful way, into the perfect world she had fought so hard to build. But then she looked at Ari, whose wide, innocent eyes were fixed on the broken man. One day her son would ask about his father. He would be curious. What would she tell him? That his father was a monster who tried to destroy them. Yes, that was true. But what would Ari see when he looked at his own reflection? Would he see a piece of that monster in himself? She couldn't give him that burden. With a deep breath, Charlotte made a choice. It was not for Jackson. It was for Ari. No, Jackson, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. You can't buy your way back, not even with a small toy. His face fell, his last hope crumbling. But, she continued, her voice regaining its strength, one day he is going to ask me about you. And I want to be able to tell him that his biological father, the man who made a terrible mistake, finally learned what it meant to be a decent human being. She stepped forward, keeping Ari slightly behind her. I don't want your gifts, and you are not going to be a part of his life. Not now. Maybe not ever. But if there is any sliver of a chance, it starts with you. Fix yourself, not your finances. You. Get a real job. Find some stability. Learn what integrity is. Become a man your son wouldn't be ashamed of. She pulled a card from her wallet. It was for a charitable foundation run by Vance Global that specialized in job training and placement for people trying to rebuild their lives. This is not a handout, she said, holding it out to him. It's a door. What you do when you walk through it is up to you. That is the only thing I will ever give you. He stared at the card, as if it were a lifeline. With a trembling hand, he took it. Thank you. He whispered the words, barely audible. Don't thank me, Charlotte said, her gaze like steel. Earn it. Without another word, she took Ari's hand and turned her back on Jackson Hayes. She walked away without looking back, leaving him standing alone under the golden leaves of the oak tree, clutching a tiny card that represented not forgiveness, but a final, unexpected chance at redemption. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the courage in your heart. Charlotte faced the ultimate betrayal, but found her power not in revenge, but in choosing a new beginning for herself and her child. She proved that integrity and love are assets that can never be frozen or liquidated. If her journey of resilience and the quiet, devastating power of a father's love resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength and justice. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Your support helps us continue to bring these compelling stories to you. Thank you for listening.